Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our regular Tuesday evening slot. And we've finished another chapter and we're starting another new chapter again tonight. And this time we're getting right down to the basics, to the core of our being, which is our cells. As we know, we are made up of, not too sure who counted, but they reckon about 73 plus trillion cells. And we are only as healthy and energized as that individual cell. And I don't know if you've ever looked at a cell under a microscope. They're quite fascinating things. I remember doing some cellular studies during my studies when I was way back in the dark ages. And the cells are fascinating things. And the more and more that they find out about them, the more fascinating they become. So I'm going to share my screen, and I've cheated a little bit tonight, or should I say with this presentation, because I am using a couple of presentations, one that was done for a high school and one that was done for a university. But don't worry, it's still our normal human language and not higher grade stuff. And I've tried to keep it a little bit more fun and interesting as well. Let me share my screen. And shrink myself down over there. So first of all, we're going to have a little introduction to cells. And all living things are composed of one or more cells. As we know, you get things called amoebas, which are single-celled beings, for want of any better terminology, up to us, who are quite complex beings with a few more cells around. And each cell is capable of carrying out all of the life functions. For example, digestion and respiration. And where do you think we would be if our cells weren't allowing us to digest food or to breathe, basically, because that's what respiration is? We wouldn't be around for very long. Now, cells come in different shapes and sizes to enhance or help their functions. Each cell is different. If you think of your fingernails to your fingerprints and the skin, and going then deeper into your blood vessels. This picture over here is of, where's my cursor, of red blood cells right there. Now, these little red blood cells have to do all sorts of fancy gymnastics to be able to filter through areas like our kidneys, for instance. It's quite fascinating how they work. And the other cells are similar to that. So they use an example of red blood cells that are round and smooth to enable their movement through the bloodstream. But when they have to go through, like the kidneys, for instance, they've got to become long and thin, almost like spaghetti. Now, cells on their own can do various things, but together they do a lot more. And if you think of an army, for instance, if you've got one soldier, he can probably do a little bit, and he could probably make a bit of a dent on the enemy. But imagine a platoon of soldiers or a battalion of soldiers. A whole lot more can work better. And we know that on our own business, basically, one person can do so much. But couple that one person with a team, and look how far you get. We all only have a certain amount of time to do things. But if you leverage that time and work together, see how much more you can get done in a smaller space of time. Exactly the same with our cells. So cells work together to create tissues. Tissues work together to create organs. Organs work together to create organ systems, like your respiratory system or your cardiac system. Not just the heart, it's not just the lungs, it's a complete system. Sorry. And the organ systems work together to create organisms, which, technically speaking, that's what we are. We're an organism. Then you get little things called organelles, which are inside the cell and are very small structures that carry out specific jobs. So this little graphic over here gives you a rough idea of what a cell looks like. If you look at it under a microscope, it's this tiny little blob. But then you've got to go deeper into that. And I saw a fascinating photograph that was done recently where they used all sorts of wonderful gadgets. They used electron microscopes and MRIs and a whole lot of different gadgets to create an actual photograph of the cell and what it looks like on the inside. And this little graphic over here has got nothing on that photograph. It is fascinating. I was trying to find it and put it up somewhere along during the presentation at some stage. Now, the center of the cell is called the nucleus. And that is where all the controls are in the cell. Then you have a nuclear membrane, which, sorry, the nuclear membrane surrounds the nucleus. And then within that, you get the DNA, which is the genetic material that condenses into chromosomes. So you can see that the cell breaks down into even smaller parts. Quite fascinating. If you really look at this whole complex thing and you see how amazingly well we are made from the minuscule inner beings of the cell, which we're still learning about, never mind anything else. Who's to say that there was no intelligent being that put all of that together? We were not just an explosion of gas that happened to come together. Everything has been created together for a specific reason and for a specific job. Starting off the very basics of the cell and really expanding out into the universe. But we won't get into that because that's a bit of philosophy tonight, and I'm not going to get into that right now. Now, you also get a cytoplasm, which is a jelly-like fluid of the cell that holds the organelles, which are those small structures that carry out specific jobs. Then you get your cell plasma membrane, which surrounds the cell and lets materials in and out. We learned about this with, sorry, with our cellular graphic sketch that we use with the tree and end talk, where we know that that membrane, if it is not soft and pliable, doesn't allow things in and out correctly. So if that cell membrane is not soft and pliable and working correctly, it cannot absorb stuff. Again, I bring up my little example of climbing into a shower wearing a raincoat. Yes, you will pick up a little bit of water because it'll splash up off the floor and maybe leak through a couple of spots in the raincoat, but you're not going to get completely wet. Take off the raincoat, and suddenly you can enjoy your shower. Same with the cell membrane. If it's that hard, stiff raincoat, yes, some nutrients and things will get through, but not everything will. And you'll also have a lot of waste products that now stay within the cell and can't be pushed out. So it's very, very important for that cell membrane to be healthy. Now, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell that does the cellular respiration. So essentially, that's the lungs of your cell. Then you get ribosomes, which synthesize or make proteins. For example, hair and muscle, which are both proteins. And then you get the endoplasmic reticulum. Don't worry about the big fancy terms. Scientists love these big fancy terms, and half of them don't even know what they stand for anyway. That's why we have fancy dictionaries. But that is a system of tunnels for the transport of materials. So think of like the northern hemisphere, where they're pumping oil out of the ground, and they've got to pump it from the ground to a holding area. They don't just pull it out the ground and put it into little 5-liter jugs and put it on the back of a truck and drive it. They put it into a pipe that takes it directly from the source along the pipe to wherever it is that they're storing the oil. And we've got the same sort of thing in our cells and in our body. Now, molecules and their building blocks. Some molecules are too big to move across a cell membrane and need to be broken down into their small building blocks first. Now, we'll take this a little bit like exactly the information that we're using right now. When we broadcast these talks, for instance, what I am is a whole lot of sound and little bits and pieces that are being broken down, pushed into my fiber network, running along a fiber system into an exchange system, and then all those little pieces then come together again when they go through your modem or router or whatever it is you're using to be able to see me talking. Think about how fast that takes. Well, our body works exactly the same way, just in a slightly different way. It's got to take the big stuff and break it down into the little stuff that can be used, and then the waste stuff gets chucked out. So if you have a too big a molecule, like starch, which, for example, is pasta or potatoes or something like that, your body can't use it. It's got to break it down into a small building block called glucose or simple sugar. Another example of a big molecule is protein, like a piece of chicken or fish or steak. You eat that piece of chicken, it's got to get into your cell. That big piece of chicken can't fit into that microscopic little cell, so it's got to be broken down into an amino acid that your cell can use. Once inside the cell, the small molecules can be used as raw materials for the synthesis of other compounds, such as hair, so to create hair, enzymes, and stored starch. You literally are what you eat. We've heard that so often. This now shows you exactly what that means. So if you're living on a diet of junk food, well, I'll let you do the breakdown. That is why it is so important to give your body the correct tools, meaning the correct food that it can break down into the correct raw material to keep us healthy and working correctly. And glycogen is stored starch in muscles and liver. Now, your cell plasma or membrane, these are the functions of the cell membrane. It separates the cell from its outside environment, and it controls which molecules enter and exit the cell. The cell membrane is selectively permeable because you don't want toxins and other junk coming into the cell that can poison it. You want good things in, you don't want the bad things in. It's the same as, think about your front door. You don't leave your front door open for any Tom, Dick, and Harry to come in. You want to check and filter out who is coming and who isn't coming, because that way you know that you're getting good things into your house, not bad things into your house. So the cell membrane has to be selectively permeable, and it recognizes messages from hormones using the specific shape of the hormone and the shape of the protein receptor molecule. So we've heard in other talks that various molecules have got certain receptors. So like a vitamin B12 receptor, for instance, it's not going to absorb a vitamin B6 because that receptor is there for a vitamin B12. If you think about filling your car with fuel, very expensive hobby these days, but the fuel nozzle is a certain diameter. Your fuel tank is a certain diameter. So in theory, not in practice, but in theory, you shouldn't be able to put a diesel nozzle into a petrol fuel tank because the nozzles should be different sizes. And if you put diesel into a petrol tank, or your car's not going to be very happy. Pretty much the same as our system. You put junk fats in instead of the good fats, your body's not going to be very happy. So, for example, when you eat a meal, your blood glucose rises. In response, your pancreas releases the hormone insulin, and insulin is a hormone. This tells the cells to let the sugar into the cell, and the blood sugar then lowers back down. If the hormones are not working correctly and your cells are not working correctly, your blood sugar levels rise and your cells don't get it. And that's where those sugar levels get out of balance. And that's where diabetes comes from. So now we're going from high school and we're going to university. And this is an interesting little presentation. So we'll see how far we get with it. Brought to you compliments of the University of Houston. So we need food. Why do we need food? Food affects almost everything we do. It affects how we look, feel, and act. It even affects our abilities, how well we function every day. Think about when you get very, very hungry, or if your blood sugar levels are out of whack. How does that affect your energy levels? Food has an impact on life because it supplies nutrients, which are substances in food that your body needs to function properly, such as in growing, in repairing itself, and in having a supply of energy. And if you think about it, if you have a good, healthy, balanced diet and you're having sufficient energy, you're feeling good. If you're having a lot of junk food, you don't feel so good and you're lacking that energy and you feel tired and exhausted all the time. So nutrition is both a pure science and a social science. As a pure science, it looks at how the body uses nutrients. As a social science, it looks at the relationship between food and human behavior and the environment, or how and why people eat. So nutrition and nutrients. Now remember, diet is what you eat. Nutrition is what your cells actually get to absorb and use. There are 6 types of nutrients: carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and water. And the nutrients that provide energy, we've all heard of calories, but what is a calorie? A food calorie is actually a kilocalorie, which is equal to 1,000 calories. Don't worry about the maths. Calorie is useful in comparing the energy available from different foods when we are deciding what food to eat. For example, a small apple contains only 80 calories, while a slice of apple pie contains almost 350 calories, a little bit more than what you should be having. So carbohydrates, fats, and proteins provide the energy and perform other important functions. Now, we need energy for all activities. When our body uses carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, energy is released in the form of calories. Now, these are big fancy terms, and they're sort of quite generalized terms. We often throw them around loosely. We talk about protein, we talk about carbs. So there's the high carb, the low carb, the no carb, the proteins, fats, etc. So this is really breaking all of this down to give you a slightly better idea of what do we mean when we talk about things like carbohydrates. Athletes are not the only people who need carbohydrates. Everyone needs them. Now, the person who's sitting in front of a computer all day working in the office don't need as many carbohydrates as an athlete who's going out to do the Comrades Marathon, for instance. They need a lot more carbohydrates. Or think of somebody who's working like on a farm out in the field. They need significantly more carbohydrates than the person sitting in the office working out how much profit the farm is making. Now, carbohydrates are the sugars and starches that are found in foods. They're made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And there are two general types of carbohydrates, simple and complex. And the simple ones are not the good ones. The simple carbohydrates are the different forms of sugar, which are easy for the body to process. And these sugars are fructose and glucose, which are found in fruits and vegetables, lactose, which is found in milk, and sucrose, which is refined and purified to produce table sugar. Anything that ends in O's is sugar. So that is when you look at all these fancy terminology, you can figure out where and how that sugar comes from. Now, sucrose is what we generally understand. When most people talk about sugar, they are actually talking about sucrose, which is that white coarse stuff that we chuck in our tea and our coffee. That is, because it's refined, not good, because it's a simple carbohydrate. What we need is a complex carbohydrate that your body can get its own sucrose from as and how it needs. Because if we just use the refined stuff, we're missing out on all the other trace elements and we're overdosing our body. So the most important of all of this to the body is glucose, the form of the sugar that goes directly to the bloodstream and provides quick energy. All other sugars must be changed into glucose by the body before the cells can use them. The cells use glucose as their primary source of energy. Glucose that is not needed immediately is converted by the body to glycogen, which is a form of starch stored in the muscles and liver, or it is converted to and stored as body fat. Some people have a lot more stored glycogen than others. And if you have too much stored glycogen, you are considered overweight and we need to talk to you. So simple carbohydrate foods, what are they? Where do we find them? Simple carbohydrates are found in foods such as fruits, milk, and vegetables. And this can be translated into cake, candy, and other refined sugar products, which are simple sugars, which also provide energy. So for that instant pick-me-up, you're going to have a high sugar snack, like a bar one, for instance. It'll give you a boost of sugar boosted energy, but it doesn't have the vitamins, minerals, and fiber that we need. There are many cases of foods that contain simple carbohydrates that are suitable for a healthful diet. For example, fruits and veggies contain simple carbohydrates, but they are also rich in micronutrients, such as vitamins and minerals, and they contain some dietary fiber. And this is where one's got to be careful, because yes, you need the simple carbohydrates, but as we've seen over the years, in nature, nature does not just provide a single thing. It is always a complex of things. So sugar that we get from sugar cane, once it's been processed, is bad. Sugar cane isn't bad. Yes, it's got the simple carbohydrate of sugar in it, but it also has fiber and minerals and vitamins all mixed together. So technically, eating the sugar cane is healthier than just the processed sugar. And this is what happens with a lot of the junk foods that we've had, that we eat these days. They take out all the good stuff and they eat just, and they leave just the sugary, starchy stuff, which is bad. If you watch nature, think of a piece of corn, for instance, a mealie. When you look at an animal eating that mealie kernel, what do they eat? They take out the germ, which is the healthy part. It's got the vitamin E, it's got the minerals, and it's got all the other bits and pieces. What do we as humans eat? We eat the yellow part or the starchy part, and we generally leave the germ behind. So we're eating the bad and leaving the good, yet nature works the other way around. So milk and milk products contain lactose, which is a type of simple carbohydrate. Now, these foods do not contain fiber, but they are rich in protein, calcium, and vitamin D. Simple carbohydrates to avoid are typically in processed foods or those with added sugar. There was a thing that I saw quite a while back that said, if it is made by a plant, it's good for you. If it is made in a plant, it's bad for you. So plant meaning factory. So if it's made by a plant, which is a green, it's good. If it's made in a plant, which is a factory, it's bad. Now, adding sugar to food increases its calorie content without providing any additional nutrition. And that is where the downside comes, and that is where the problems start. And that is where we see so many issues in today's lifestyle. Now, complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, are starches, or should I say starches are complex carbohydrates that are made up of many units. Sorry, I'm running out of time over here. or other sugars, which form long chains. Now, these chains must be broken down by the body into single units of glucose before they can be used. Starches take longer than sugars to be broken down into glucose. Starches provide energy to the body over longer periods than do simple sugars. Breads, cereals, pasta, and potatoes all contain starch. And that is why athletes, think of comrades, use these sort of starches, because they break down and they need that energy to be delivered over the 98-kilometer run. Now, dietary fiber is another complex carbohydrate, which comes from the non-digestible parts of plants. There are two types of dietary fiber, namely soluble and insoluble. Soluble fiber combines with waste and other substances to assist in their removal from the body. And these are found in things like oats, bran, beans, apples, carrots, and other veggies. Insoluble fiber absorbs the water and helps to provide needed bulk to the diet. And this is found in whole grains and the skins and the seeds of fruits and veggies. So what sort of complex carbohydrate foods do we get? Complex carbohydrates raise the blood glucose levels for longer and produce a more lasting elevation in energy. Complex carbohydrates are found in whole foods that tend to be highly nutritious. For example, whole grain foods contain a layer of bran and germ, which provide fiber, vitamin B and E, phytochemicals, and healthful fats. They may also reduce the risk of several chronic health conditions, such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and several forms of cancer. Complex carbs are healthier than simple carbs because they are generally nutrient dense. This means they contain a large amount of nutrients in relation to the number of calories they provide. Whole grains, fruits, veggies, and legumes are highly nutritious foods that are rich in antioxidants, fiber, vitamins, and minerals. And that is where I'm going to end this session, because I'd like to take it a little bit more slowly, going through each of these things to give you a slightly better idea of exactly what each of those sources are. Right, does anybody have any questions before I stop recording? Okay, I'm going to stop recording and then